My name is Christopher Schneider, and I am a professor of sociology at Brand University. And I'm here to talk about my new book called Policing and Social Media, Social Control in an Era of Digital Media, second edition. This book is basically the culmination of about 10 years of research in relation to how social media has influenced changes in policing and police work. So I really started thinking about the first edition of this book during the 2011 riots in Vancouver. This was following Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. The Canucks lost. There was a riot. There was a similar riot in 1994. The difference between these two riots was the role that social media played in how the police identified apprehended suspects, including how members of the public uploaded materials, naming and shaming websites. At the time, there wasn't really a whole lot of research on how any of that process not only unfolded, but the consequences of that process on how police then would incorporate and adopt social media platforms into their police work and into police strategies. So for example, the VPD at the time, that is the Vancouver Police Department, did not have an official social media policy on how police should be officially or formally using social media platforms. They quickly developed one following the 2011 Vancouver riot. So fast forward several years, you have a whole variety of crimes and that police are investigating online. That's one part of it. But then also the book looks at the ways in which police have incorporated social media platforms into policing their brand. We might call brand management. Some scholars have referred to it as police presentational strategies, police image work. And the idea is to provide materials to members of the public that show the police doing good things, heroic things, to sort of garner public favor in those situations. Some of these things are unrelated to police work if we understand police work as crime work. But again, police are not in the business of crafting or scripting lip dub videos to the Backstreet Boys or any other that kind of thing. So that drew my attention increasingly to how police have continued to use social media platforms, including notably TikTok. So TikTok was not a social media platform when the first edition of this book was published, and has since, of course, as we all know, become one of the fastest growing social media platforms, primarily among young persons, especially in Canada and young Canadians. So while all police agencies are not on TikTok, some are, and getting a sense of understanding what it is they're doing and how this contributes to police brand management also attracted my attention and sort of got me thinking about doing a second edition of this book, and here we are. Every chapter has been expanded. There are increased examples across the book that help to illustrate key points. Recent research literature that's been published about police use of social media has been added throughout the book. So when I first started thinking about and writing this book in around 2011, there really wasn't a whole lot of research yet on police use of social media, which is really hard to believe when you look at the research. Police agencies worldwide started joining social media between 2009 and 2011. But you got to keep in mind, MySpace launched in 2003, Facebook 2004, YouTube in 2005. So at this time, as social media was expanding across the media landscape, police agencies were largely not joining social media in official capacity. Now, to be clear, they were certainly doing undercover work, but it's really hard to figure that out because the whole point of going undercover is not to be discovered. So it's more about the presentational strategies that police are sort of engaging in. And as I noted, another big expansion in the book is there's a whole case study now on TikTok. There's been hardly any research that's been published that's looked at police use of TikTok around the world, not just in a Canadian context, but in the United States and elsewhere. And I think this is a pretty sizable gap in the research literature because we really need to understand how police agencies are using TikTok primarily to engage with young persons. So this book is sort of a contribution to developing some of that literature. Some of it has to do with the way in which the type of media platform, how it's being used in that sense. So think about video. I mean, TikTok obviously are short video snippets, and everyone who's on TikTok knows that. That's a little different than Facebook, which can include video, but largely TikTok is catered to very short video snippets. So what we're seeing is police agencies making very short videos in attempts to go viral in hopes of being noticed. And this is something also that the book explores, is the whole idea of wanting to go viral and the long-term consequences of this. For example, people who follow the Toronto Police Service on their social media platforms, including TikTok, might live in Manitoba or British Columbia or in another country. And I document this in the book. Then the question becomes, should police be catering to people outside of their jurisdictional boundaries? And what are sort of some of the implications that might have on our understandings of police work more generally. So the book sort of explores some of those materials and I think opens up some questions for future research. I focused on some of the criticisms that people had about the book, and one of which was that I did not interview police officers to talk about how police officers thought about their social media use. I wrote about that in this book and said, hey, look, I'm discussing media use broadly in our understandings about media use and public understandings. So drawing from social media platforms, user-generated understandings of police work. So that's one area in which I focused on. One of the other ones is looking at TikTok. So in Canada, when I started thinking about putting together this book, there were two papers that mentioned police use of TikTok, and I wrote one of those papers. The other one was published out of the University of Windsor. So I thought, well, there's not a whole lot of research literature here, and I started looking elsewhere and noticed, a lot of others hadn't discussed this. So that was the biggest, I think, approach or way in which I was thinking about expanding and developing the second edition. Also, there are a couple of chapters in there that when I was writing them, the completion or conclusion of the events that the chapters discussed had not ended. This book was published in April of 2016, so it was already in press, and I was unable to add some of the final concluding elements of the Vancouver riot in 2011. So in some ways, I was able to complete that chapter, which I'm very happy about. There's another chapter in there on a watershed moment in the Canadian context where in 2013, a police officer in Toronto shot and killed a Toronto teenager named Sami Yatim on a Toronto streetcar. And the video of that was shared to YouTube in advance of the police making any statements about that video and in advance of the news media making any statements about that video. The final discussions of that in the form of a coroner's report were released earlier this year in February of 2024. So the shooting and the killing happened in 2013 and went all the way into 2024. So at the time when I was writing in the first edition of this book, these chapters in that sense were not completed. And this points to a broader point about this book in relation to how Canadians and people more broadly expect that the criminal justice system is going to be more expedient because all of the data and evidence is clearly online. We live in an era now where you have social media silos and people are able to follow friends and thinkers, politicians, others who then reinforce their ideas about the world. Sometimes these ideas are not based off of evidence. It sort of reinforces people's beliefs. If you follow people with similar beliefs and you put things out there and they put things out there, it contributes to reinforcing how people think and see the world. And I think this has led to pretty divisive divisions between people in relation to understandings of legitimacy. There's research that develops in the early 2000s that supports that social media has contributed to exacerbating some of these divisions. So we have to be very careful to say that social media does not cause people to think how they think, but rather people can gravitate toward these spaces and they serve as like echo chambers to reinforce some of their beliefs. And we have different authority figures, politicians who in some ways have played up upon this, and it leads to political points and people becoming more popular as authority figures, again, on the basis of materials and statements that have no evidence in some circumstances whatsoever to support what some of these individuals are saying. And we live in an era where this points to incredibly problematic ways of thinking about how we move forward in relation to democracy. And I don't have any really solid answers on how we do just that, but I think in some ways this book contributes to how we can start to think about some of those materials. What's going to be the next TikTok? What's going to be the next Facebook? If I knew that, then I would be a billionaire and retired and on a beach somewhere. It's hard to say because it's constantly changing and evolving, and that's what I'll be paying attention to. So perhaps there'll be a new social media platform that will be like a TikTok, and we'll see in the ways in which that contributes to police brand management, presentational strategies, because there's a lot of discussions about this in relation to police administrators and publics wanting to restore trust and confidence in police and police legitimacy. So body-worn cameras, cell phone footage, some of these materials are being put up online, and this contributes to the judgments that people make about the rightfulness of police conduct. So maybe there's a new platform that helps police to, better control or navigate some of these public judgments. I've been teaching a course on police and society for 15 or 16 years, and many of the conversations that we have in those classes, I draw from materials that are in the news media or social media posts. And the students have all types of really cool and interesting insights they've shared and we've discussed in the Police and Society course. So some of that's contributed to the ways in which I've thought about these materials, how to approach these materials. And in addition, we have numerous faculty on campus who bring different ideas and perspectives based on their different disciplines and training, and through conversations over coffee with people, and they see things differently than I do, and that also contributes to how I think and changes in how I think. And that's been very profound, and I think a lot of that's worked its way into this second edition. I think the most special thanks goes out to my spouse and partner in crime. That would be Dr. Stacy Hannum. She contributed in ways that are far too detailed and numerous to recount here, including years of conversations. She, I think, above all, has really contributed to helping me think through many of these things, think through some of the problems and struggles I was having developing and dealing with these materials. And so I would name her first and foremost, and this book is actually, it's dedicated to her.